Hey folks! Every few months I hop on a ferry and head over to Vancouver, where I visit some friends and spend way too much money on food. I did this a few weeks ago, and I indeed tasted some tasty meals, but I also convinced two of my friends to go with me to the recently opened Chinese Canadian Museum in Vancouver's Chinatown. I had heard so many good things about it. I follow them on Instagram. I also visited their sister museum in Victoria's Chinatown recently, and I figured, well, I go to Vancouver often enough, I should probably go and check it out. But for some context, hey, I'm Christia, and on this channel I talk about history and museums. I talk about the discourse, the conversations, and everything else that is kind of happening around these types of institutions. And so if that is your thing, history and museum discourse, consider sticking around. So the Chinese Canadian Museum is a brand spanking new museum. It opened on July 1st of 2023, which is a very significant date to the Chinese Canadian community because it was the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which I will tell you about more in a second, so just put a pin in that for now. When I did my last exhibit review on Old Town at the Royal British Columbia Museum, I broke my critique down into 3 different categories, primarily interpretation, accessibility, and experience. And I will do a rating based on these 5 categories at the end of the video, but in the meantime, I want to give you a bit of a walkthrough, not like a very thorough one, because I want to encourage you to go and see this place for yourself. So without further ado, let's walk through. The Chinese Canadian Museum is housed in the Wing Sang building in Vancouver's Chinatown, a beautiful old heritage building that they have renovated into an exhibit space. When you first enter the museum on the ground floor, head up to the main desk, pay your $15 entry fee, and then you have a choice of 3 different pamphlets. One of them is in fact right here. This is the one that I chose. And the choice between these 3 pamphlets is they are in either English, Chinese, or simplified Chinese. So I of course got English because I do not speak languages that are not English. I barely speak English very well. What am I saying? And I love it when museums give away these free little guides because it's a free souvenir and it can help you just navigate a museum, especially if it's kind of got a bit of a complicated floor plan. And I don't know, I feel like in a way it's kind of like a miniature version of the exhibit, and I really, really appreciate it when these institutions give these away. But once you finish at the front desk, you've paid your entry fee, you've got your little pamphlet, you hang a left and you will find yourself in the permanent exhibit space, which gives like a broad overview of Chinese Canadian history. There was a giant map that showed the Chinese diaspora, and the first panel discussed how these stories will change over time, which is really nice to see in a museum because history is not static. We're always learning new things. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you've heard me say this before, but to see that acknowledgement by a museum, like right away on one of the first panels you see, was just really, really awesome, and I really, really appreciated that they're willing to update their stories and their perspectives as time goes on. So on one side of this permanent exhibit space on the first floor, you have a large kind of artistic wall mural, and the other side is dedicated to the artifacts and the interpretive panels. Throughout this entire museum, the interpretive text is very thorough. It's not like in other museums where you walk in and it's just like a wall of text and it's very daunting. This was very like calculated and specific, and it didn't drag on too long, which was really, really great to see. All of the text was also in 3 different languages. It was in Chinese, simplified Chinese, and in English, which you might think would be, you know, the bare minimum for a Chinese Canadian museum, but I don't know. Museums are difficult and the bar is on the floor, so I'm still going to give them applause for doing this because, well, that's part of the demographic that's going to come and see this, is people who speak Chinese and people who speak English, and it's good that everybody has a chance to interpret and engage with the text who is most likely to come and see this place. So as I've mentioned, this was a very broad overview of the history of the Chinese-Canadian community, and it included things like relations with Indigenous peoples of British Columbia specifically, which I thought was really, really cool. For my own personal background, I was started out in anthropology and studying culture, and I've always really been interested in the overlap of cultures. I've always been really interested in seeing what sort of ideas and food and customs and just things happen when two very different cultures meet and combine and begin to create new things together. So I really, really liked this panel in particular. This part of the museum also talks about the gold rush, because you can't throw a rock at British Columbia's history without at some point hitting the gold rush, how it brought a lot of people from around the world to British Columbia, and particularly a lot of people from China. There was also a discussion of the Canadian Pacific Railway, which is another kind of main staple of our history in the last 200 years, and how a lot of people made a lot of money off of the exploitation of Chinese labor. There were also panels that talked about discrimination against the Chinese community, the community and their involvement in World War I, and several other really interesting panels. I also didn't realize it at first, but in this section we also have our very first interactive bit, and I love a good hands-on museum experience. So when I first entered this permanent exhibit space, I was at first a little bit disappointed because I was like, oh, there's not a lot of artifacts, and I like to look at things and cultural and material history. But then I saw one of my friends who I was with pulling on these tabs, and it opened these drawers which had all of the artifacts inside of them, which I thought was really cool. The artifact mounts were also fantastic. Love me a good artifact mount. At the end of this exhibit space, past all of the panels, they also had an ongoing kind of video documentary going where it had different members of the Chinese-Canadian community sharing their stories. I only really caught one of them, but they had a few in rotation, so you could spend a lot of time on the first floor just between the interpretation, the artifacts, and these different videos being played that really helped add a human element. After we finished on the main floor with this permanent exhibit space, we headed on up to the second floor. And by the way, this museum is fully accessible, so if you just don't feel like taking the stairs, or if you have a walker or a stroller, they do in fact have an elevator that is massive. You could fit like 6 strollers and a wheelchair in there, so FYI, it's accessible. The second floor is a temporary exhibit space, and it is currently housing an exhibition titled The Paper Trail to the 1923 Chinese Exclusion Act, which, by the way, they also had pamphlets for this as well, so love that. If you aren't familiar with what this act is, basically it was an act that prevented anybody from China immigrating to Canada. If you were Chinese and living in Canada, you also had to register with the government, and you would be issued a CI certificate, or Chinese Immigration Certificate. These pieces of paper were used to monitor and control the Chinese community in Canada. The exhibition explores this racist act and how it not only affected people living in Canada, but also people back in China as well. The first large room in this exhibition is dedicated to telling you the basics of what this act was, with very easy to read panels with pictures on all of the walls. There are lots of archival images, newspaper clippings, and other bits that help to tell the emotional, financial, and familial impact this act had on people. In the center of this large room, there are large pillars that each had 6 certificates on every side, making a very impactful visual experience as you walk through and you can read the names of the Chinese community members who were issued these certificates. There is also an alleyway between this first large room and the second large room that is referred to as Bachelor's Alley. Canada's exclusionary immigration laws resulted in there being about 28 Chinese men to every single Chinese woman in Canada, and as a result, tens of thousands of men lived alone, though many had children and families back home in China. These men were referred to as uncles or bachelors, and this part of the exhibition is dedicated to telling their heartbreaking stories. They had these storybooks mounted on one side of the alley, and they opened to show a picture of an uncle or a bachelor, as well as a small panel that told his story. And of course, you could also open this even further to access the Chinese or simplified Chinese versions of the text. The third room of this exhibition was used to display not only how this act affected new immigrants from China, but also children born in Canada to immigrant parents. So there's this whole wall of children's certificates that, again, I want to really emphasize, were used to monitor, control, and also intimidate Chinese community members across Canada. Even if you would never set foot in China, if you were born in Canada, but your parents were immigrants, you were not exempt from this law. Another wall had more photographs that had clipboards beneath them, and they told the story of the person in the photograph and how the act affected them and their families' lives. And right smack dab in the center of this exhibition was a desk that was fully interactive. You could open the drawers and read more stories, and there was a large map on one side that showed a registration by region infographic. Behind the third wall in this part of the exhibition was a small room where they had even more documentaries playing. There were, I think, 3 different documentaries that you could sit and watch. These ones were a bit longer, but the one that I did watch was dedicated to telling the kind of familial impact of this act. A lot of men were in Canada who had families back home, and that resulted in a lot of married women having to raise an entire family by themselves. And it also resulted in a lot of children being unable to meet their fathers until they were adults. It was really, really heartbreaking. Overall, this temporary exhibition starts very broad, covering the racist motivations behind why it was started in the first place. But as you walk through this exhibition, it begins to narrow in focus and really drill down into the impact on everyday people who are just trying to make a life for themselves and their families. You can learn people's names, you can see their certificates and hear their stories, and it was extremely powerful and effective, and I have nothing but praise to offer. I won't lie to you, by the time we were heading up to the third floor, the museum fatigue or the informational overload was really beginning to hit me. But it's honestly like the designers expected this because there was very little text on the third floor. It was like almost entirely interactive. The third floor is set up a bit like a house museum. It's got all of the old-timey furniture that you can sit on, and one room is set up as a schoolroom and is dedicated to telling the history of the building itself, which, by the way, the Wing Sang building is the oldest in Chinatown, having been built in 1889, just a few years after Vancouver itself was founded. It was built by a Chinese merchant by the name of Yip Sang, and he expanded it over the next 15 years to accommodate his business, the Wing Sang Company, and also raise his very large family. Yip Sang took on many leadership roles, and he was very involved in the Chinese community in Vancouver. He was involved in all different types of groups, including the Chinese Benevolent Association, among, from the sounds of it, many, many others. So when you get to the third floor, as I mentioned, there isn't a lot to read. There's lots of hands-on elements, and I was very thankful for that, not just because of the museum fatigue, but because I had told my friends that this was going to be like an hour-long museum visit. But by this point, we were scooting past the 2-hour mark, so whoops. But the super interactive third floor was absolutely fantastic. Like, you could swap out some 1930s Chinese music on an old gramophone player, you could pick up an old style telephone and be told a story, but I think my absolute favorite part of the third floor was the classroom, because they had a little photo booth where you could go and get your picture taken and you could join the class of 2023. They also have a green space on the third floor, kind of a large patio area, but it was locked when I went, but I think it's kind of more reserved for events and school groups and things like that. So that was a brief overview of the 3 floors of the Chinese Canadian Museum in Vancouver, and I did skim over a lot, and I really cannot encourage you to visit this place enough because I can't do it justice in a YouTube video, and it is probably the most well done museum I have ever visited. So please go check it out if you're ever in Vancouver. But before I give my final rating, I have one more thing I want to mention, and that is something that I discovered at the end of my visit back on the first floor. They have a research room. So if you are a member of the Chinese Canadian community and you are trying to find out a bit more about your family, you want to look at some genealogical records, they have this entire room where people can explore their family histories, search through CI certificates, and they had instructions on how to explore the various genealogical records and archives across the country. And if you wanted to, if you go and do this research, they also encourage people to share their stories with the museum, which I think is, again, a great way to acknowledge the fact that these stories are always changing and history is static. And again, just so good. I'm just so glad that was just like the cherry on top for me at the end of my visit. It was perfect. So what are my final thoughts on this museum? As far as accessibility goes, that is a solid 5 out of 5 from me because they had plenty of seating available whenever there was a video playing. And throughout the exhibit space, if there wasn't seating readily available, they had these little foldable chairs that you could carry with you, or you could have a docent come and bring you one, which, by the way, they had docents, which I really appreciate. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, they also had an elevator because this is multiple floors of a museum. You kind of need that, especially because the bathrooms are in the basement. But they have a massive elevator for you to use, so 5 out of 5. When it came to the interpretation, another 5 out of 5 from me, because it was very digestible and it came in different forms, so you weren't just staring at a wall the whole time. You could go and open one of the storybooks in Bachelor's Alley, you could go and pick up a clipboard. There was lots of different ways that they keep you engaged through the whole thing. And just to again mention the docents, the fact that they are there, that means that if you ever have any questions or if there's like something that you'd like to have someone explain to you, they are present to help you out, which I, again, love. And finally, when it comes to experience, I am unsurprisingly giving it another 5 out of 5. Being in such a relevant building in the heart of Vancouver's Chinatown really helped to situate you in the history that the museum was sharing. And again, all those different types of hands-on experiences and interpretation really helped to keep the museum fatigue at bay. Like, oh, you're tired of reading? Well, why don't you go dig around in this desk and see what you can find? Or go and watch a documentary where people tell their stories, or just so many different ways to keep you engaged, and the way that they continue to share the story and the message they're trying to tell you through all of this was just so lovingly and expertly well done, and I cannot sing the praises of this place enough. It was just so well done, and if you are one of the people that work there or have worked on this, congratulations. Good job. With all of this being said, I foresee a problem with the Chinese Canadian Museum in the future. So the museum is brand new, and it came about because of a lot of funding from the provincial British Columbia government as well as the Canadian federal government. Tens of millions of dollars have been funneled into this place, and as we've discussed, it turned out great. Problem is that one day the money will run out. And as I have personally experienced, the current political climate does not want to continue funding these places. As I have discussed on this channel, I lost my job earlier this year. It was a provincially owned heritage site that had to shut down because we couldn't get more than a handful of pocket change from the provincial government. If the Chinese Canadian Museum flounders and fails in the next couple of years, I can't see this government stepping in because that's not what this government does. But I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that this place flourishes, and I hope if you don't have a chance to go to this museum, I hope that you go to your local institution and support them. Because once these places disappear, they don't come back. I'm sorry to end this video on a bit of a negative note, but heritage is struggling everywhere, and it would feel wrong to not mention this. So go vote, go support your local museum, and wherever you are, I hope that you have a wonderful day or evening, and I will see you next time.